something about D-Rock being head of Puff security after I had left.
So it meant a lot to me to actually have the opportunity to work with somebody of that magnitude.
What is the job of an executive assistant? What do you do?
Well, the job of an executive assistant is to staff him. 24/7, essentially, he needs staffing.
Puff may have promised D-Rock something to help him get big to that party.
Would go to a hotel room or be at his home, his bedroom, and they would have intimate gatherings.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
When one of the biggest names in music faces unexpected courtroom revelations, the world watches closely. In today's video, we're diving into the explosive testimony delivered by Diddy's former assistant, a shocking account that has taken both fans and the courtroom by surprise. The allegations include jaw-dropping details of so-called freak-off nights and outrageous requests that left the courtroom stunned. These revelations paint a picture far removed from the glitz and glamour often associated with the music mogul. As the testimony unfolded, all eyes were on Diddy. His real-time reactions, ranging from disbelief to visible frustration, added yet another layer of drama to the already tense atmosphere. Stay tuned as we break down each moment, day by day, revealing how this bombshell testimony is reshaping public perception and possibly changing the course of Diddy's legacy.
With us at all times. We'd have their marijuana joints on us. We would have the mushrooms on us. We had a kind of a Diddy pack is what they would call it. And we would keep a satchel on us, and that's what we would have in that satchel. They were referred to me as Wild King Nights. And what a Wild King Night was when him and a guest would go to a hotel room or be at his home, his bedroom, and they would have intimate gatherings. I would have to go and prep that hotel room, which consisted of baby oil, Astroglide, candles, incense, liquor, lights, tons of toiletries, drugs. I had no idea that he had this other side to him. And when I started to get exposed to his lifestyle, I started to really realize, this guy has an addiction. It's not just, once every few weeks. It's every day, every hour.
Hey, yo, Phil, can y'all come straighten it up over here? Not looking luxurious.
The personal assistant also became the personal maid. Diddy's sex parties meant hotel rooms were often trashed. Phil was expected to get his hands dirty cleaning up, with the priority being to ensure no evidence was left behind. No secrets could ever escape.
Initially, when you walk in, you have to start to clean up the mess and the wreckage that's left from the room. And that's the alcohol that's halfway open. Some bottles are cracked, glasses are cracked. There's baby oil everywhere on the floors in the bathroom. There's lube everywhere, half open, some of it oozing off the sides. And you have to get all that stuff, clean it up. Luckily, I would wear even a mask and I would wear gloves because it was disgusting.
Phil, what would have happened if you said to Diddy, look, that's just not my job, I'm not going to do it?
If I said that to Diddy, I wouldn't have worked there. They would find somebody else.
The moment Diddy's former assistant stepped up to testify, the courtroom fell into a tense silence. All eyes were fixed on the individual who had once lived in the shadows of the music mogul, someone with intimate knowledge of Diddy's private world. As Diddy sat at the defense table, carefully avoiding direct eye contact, the assistant began to speak. Their voice was clear and steady, instantly commanding the room's attention. This wasn't just an employee, it was someone who had moved within the inner circle, fully immersed in the rhythms of Diddy's professional and personal life. With striking precision, the assistant described their role in painstaking detail, establishing themselves as more than a mere bystander. Then came the moment that had been whispered about for years, the mention of the infamous freak-off nights. Without flinching, the assistant recounted the lavish and tightly guarded nature of these events. Far beyond ordinary parties, these nights were veiled in secrecy and designed with meticulous care. Only a select few were invited, and every detail, from the guest list to the atmosphere, was planned to Diddy's exact specifications. This wasn't just excess, it was power, control, and secrecy rolled into one calculated production. The testimony grew more disturbing as the assistant revealed chilling demands allegedly made to fulfill Diddy's expectations. They described being forced to arrange uncomfortably specific accommodations for the events, tasks they said felt dehumanizing. Their job, they claimed, was to ensure attendees adhered to strict, often unspoken rules designed to preserve secrecy. According to the assistant, breaking those rules came with severe consequences. As these revelations spilled into the courtroom, gasps were heard from the gallery. Even the attorneys exchanged sharp, uneasy glances. The room grew heavier with every sentence. The judge maintained a neutral expression, scribbling notes, but some jurors shifted in their seats, visibly disturbed by the testimony. One courtroom attendee later told reporters that the entire audience seemed on edge, hanging on every word. When it came time to discuss specific incidents, the assistant did not hold back. One story stood out: a night when they were allegedly forced to mediate between Diddy and a guest who refused to comply with certain expectations. It didn't matter how far it went, the assistant said. He'd stop at nothing to control everything about that night. At this, Diddy visibly reacted for the first time. He shifted in his seat, rubbed his eyes, adjusted his tie, and sighed audibly, an unmistakable sign that the gravity of the moment had hit him. As the assistant continued, Diddy's tension became more apparent, his demeanor growing heavier with the weight of what was being revealed. The courtroom sat with the image of one explosive secret brought into the light, one few could have anticipated. And yet, this was just the beginning. More voices were preparing to speak out, and the full truth had yet to be told.
Two situations like that. See, Cassie told the story on the witness stand about how Puff and her was in a freak off, and then D-Rock intervened or whatever like that, and they masked themselves up in all black, took the guns out the safe, and went to find Suge. You know what I'm saying? Suge even spoke about he glad they didn't find him because a whole lot of other people would probably been dead then too, you know, if they would have found him. Now, she testified that, you know, Puff and D-Rock was going to try to, you know, unalive Suge. You know what I'm saying? Now, what I do know this, me and D-Rock had a conversation about why he's so close to Puff now. You understand? And he told me he was in a diner, Mel's Diner. I guess it was probably Mel's Diner. That's one of the diners that stay late open in California. He said that he was trapped in there and he ain't have no burners or nothing on him. He ain't have no guns, no nothing. He said he called Puff. Now, this is a story coming from D-Rock. He said he called Puff, and Puff came there. But if Puff would have came in the diner, they would have known something. He didn't come to the diner. He sent Cassie in there with the burners. And Cassie gave D-Rock the gun in the diner. Now, this is coming from D-Rock. The story Cassie told is that it was a whole different story from what D-Rock had told me, because D-Rock said he was in the diner himself. And Puff came down there with the guns, sent Cassie in there and gave him one, and was outside waiting on him to come outside. So that's the story that I knew, and I had already said that and expressed that in one of my shows before. Now, the story Cassie told, it was like she saw D-Rock and Puff both put on black and went to go unalive Suge. So those are two different stories that I know of. You know, one from D-Rock and the one we heard from Cassie. It may be the same story and Cassie just flipped it some kind of way, because D-Rock told me this years ago. And then maybe Cassie just, you know, flipped it in a certain kind of way because she took the gun to D-Rock, according to D-Rock.
The courtroom was unnervingly quiet as the former assistant continued their testimony. At the defense table, Diddy sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, jaw clenched. The usual aura of confidence he projected seemed to have dissipated, replaced instead by a restrained tension. For the first half hour, he didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed downward, his face an unreadable mask. But for those paying close attention, the cracks were beginning to show, subtle fidgeting with his tie, slight movements forward and back in his chair, all signs of the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. As the assistant's words began to paint a vivid picture of the infamous freak-off nights, murmurs rippled through the gallery. These weren't just tales of extravagant parties. They were detailed accounts of disturbing demands and absolute control. According to the assistant, these nights were cloaked in secrecy, with every guest's behavior strictly monitored and any deviations swiftly punished. One particularly chilling moment came when the assistant described a guest being ejected for breaking an unspoken rule. At that, Diddy glanced sharply at his defense team, his expression momentarily shifting, caught somewhere between disbelief and frustration. The momentum of the testimony was palpable. Hushed whispers filled the room as spectators leaned toward one another, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Outside the courtroom, reporters furiously tapped on their phones, broadcasting each update in real time. Legal analysts would later describe the scene as one of slow unraveling, like watching a pot slowly come to a boil, ready to spill over at any moment. As the assistant's testimony delved deeper, the cracks in Diddy's composure widened. Witnesses in the room described him exhaling heavily, repeatedly clasping and unclasping his hands, and growing increasingly agitated. When the assistant recounted an especially unsettling detail, an incident where a guest was allegedly pressured into compliance by Diddy himself, the tension reached a peak. Someone in the gallery audibly gasped. It was then that Diddy's mask finally slipped. According to courtroom observers, Diddy leaned in toward his attorney, delivering a sharp, whispered remark. Though the exact words were unclear, his tone conveyed unmistakable frustration. Moments later, as the assistant continued, he sat back abruptly, shook his head, and muttered something under his breath. The motion was small but unmistakable, a rare and raw reaction from someone who had, until then, worked hard to contain himself. For legal experts following the case, such a reaction was not unexpected. Public figures, especially those who have spent decades carefully managing their image, often struggle when forced to confront deeply personal or damaging accusations under the microscope of public scrutiny. The courtroom is an equalizer, one analyst commented. The glamour and mystique of celebrity don't matter when your character is being pulled apart, word by word. In Diddy's case, the assistant's testimony struck at the heart of a private life long protected by fame, wealth, and influence. The facade, so carefully maintained, was beginning to show visible cracks. By the time court adjourned for the day, it was clear that the testimony had landed hard. As Diddy exited, he avoided eye contact with reporters and brushed past the crowd more briskly than usual. But inside the courtroom, his reactions had already added another layer of weight to the assistant's claims, an unspoken acknowledgement, perhaps, of the seriousness of what had just unfolded.
For some reason, Big had to be at that party because Puff is the one who, and you'll see in Kirk Burroughs' papers, that Puff is the one who scratched out Big trip from going to London, and then turned around and lied that Big didn't want to go to London, which was a bunch of crap. You understand what I'm saying? Because he asked Clark Kent to go to London with him. He asked Clark Kent to go to London with him. And Clark Kent was going to go to London with him, God bless the dead. You understand? Clark Kent told that story. Now, in this trial, Cassie was telling how D-Rock and Puff was trying to line Suge Knight up. But like I said, I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just going to get into the fact that D-Rock has been with Puff since Big died. You understand? He went and did a little time, and when he was in jail, he was letting everybody know when he come home, Puff was going to take care of him. And he became head of Puff security, making sure Puff was all right. Puff also gave him that clothing line, which was Bully. It was Big's ideal, but it was Invisible Bully. You understand? Gave him that clothing line. They was doing a little work, and he was doing the t-shirts and everything like that. And I guess Puff was actually, paying him back for helping him get Big to that party. I'm glad Ms. Wallace ain't here, brother, to see and hear what we're finding out about D-Rock now and the things that he did and how he was, so close to Puff and doing some of the things with Puff. And it's crazy right now. I'm glad Ms. Wallace is not here to hear that because she was somewhat fond of D-Rock.
The courtroom was still reeling from the assistant's revelations when Gene Deal, a former bodyguard and longtime confidant of Diddy, was called to testify. His presence immediately added gravity to the proceedings. Gene wasn't just another witness. He had been there during the peak of Diddy's influence, with a level of access reserved only for those in the inner circle. While his relationship with Diddy had soured years ago, everyone in the room knew his testimony could either solidify the troubling picture painted earlier or dismantle it completely. Gene's demeanor was a stark contrast to previous witnesses. Calm, measured, and deliberate in his responses, he seemed determined to make his stance unmistakably clear. "I saw things firsthand," he stated early in his testimony, setting the tone for what would become an unflinching and pointed account. As reporters scrambled to jot down every word, Gene began describing the now infamous freak-off nights in vivid detail, many of which mirrored, and in some cases went beyond, the assistant's earlier claims. He elaborated on how these gatherings were meticulously choreographed, describing them as controlled chaos. According to Gene, the parties weren't just about luxury and indulgence, they were about maintaining a specific power dynamic. Guests were subtly, and at times overtly, pressured into compliance, all under the illusion of exclusive privilege. What made Gene's testimony especially striking was not just how it aligned with earlier allegations, but the level of specificity he provided. One incident stood out in particular. Gene recounted a night where he claimed Diddy personally instructed staff to strictly enforce participation rules. Anyone not playing along wasn't just asked to leave, they were humiliated, Gene said flatly. The gallery froze as he recounted the tactics allegedly used to pressure and isolate individuals at these events. At the defense table, Diddy remained outwardly composed, but subtle signs betrayed his tension. His jaw was clenched, shoulders tight, and foot tapping sporadically as Gene spoke. The intensity in the room continued to mount as Gene described how secrecy at these gatherings wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. He revealed that phones were confiscated upon entry and that staff members were required to swear silence about anything that occurred behind closed doors. This veil of secrecy, he said, was meticulously designed to shield Diddy from outside scrutiny. The prosecution seized on this point, framing it as evidence of Diddy's awareness of just how damaging the activities could be if exposed. Gene's decision to testify seemed driven by more than legal obligation. It felt like a personal reckoning. "For years I stayed quiet out of loyalty," he said, pausing for effect. "But this has gone too far." His words carried a sense of authenticity that resonated through the courtroom. By the end of his testimony, it was clear that Gene Deal had not only corroborated much of what the assistant alleged, he had cemented a detailed and consistent narrative that the defense was visibly struggling to dismantle. For the jury, his revelations may have been the most compelling yet. Gene had done more than just testify. He had drawn a disturbing portrait of a private world hidden behind the curtain of celebrity, one that, if believed, could fundamentally alter the public perception of one of music's most powerful figures.
That's a effed up subject and situation, man, to even imagine that you got somebody doing that to somebody that you supposed to care about and you supposed to be in a relationship with.
Yeah, when I heard that, that was crazy to hear. Disturbing, man.
You can't make this shit up, bro. This is made for Triple X TV. The stories that we're hearing about the things that Cassie has done, and we got these people out here believing that, she made this shit up. She ain't did this with nobody. I ain't seen not one of her ex-boyfriends. I ain't seen not one of the people that she dated in high school or none of that stuff come out and say that she was doing that way before she got to Diddy. So it is disturbing, bro. It's disturbing that he could brainwash her to the point whereas that she believing that she pleasing him and all his fetishes and everything by doing some shit that she's doing for him, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, she testified that Diddy, he'll rub male escorts cum on his nipples.
Bro, what do you want me to say about that? That's some nasty, perverted shit. You know what I'm saying? Bruh, when you that high and you into that, to me, that's the demonic, bruh. That's some old crazy otherworld shit. Excuse me for my language. That's some crazy otherworld stuff that people in their right minds don't even think of stuff like that, bruh. People that's not in a whole sense of being perverted, that's triple X type of shit, man. That's stuff that normal people don't even think of, man. How high do you get that you want another man juices rubbed on you after dating ejaculated or come on your girl? How high do you get for that shit, bruh? I always say this. Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
The courtroom's attention was razor-focused as more disturbing details emerged about the infamous freak-off nights. Leading up to this moment, the assistant's previous testimony had already laid the foundation, a tangled web of secrecy, excess, and control. Now, under direct questioning, they were pushed to provide specific examples, and their responses were nothing short of shocking. According to the assistant, these gatherings were far from spontaneous affairs. They described them as meticulously orchestrated events, where nearly every detail was pre-planned to satisfy Diddy's precise desires. The nights reportedly began with a carefully curated guest list sent only to individuals who had either proven their loyalty or signed strict non-disclosure agreements. Attendees ranged from high-profile industry insiders to lesser-known figures, all of whom were expected to follow a stringent set of rules, many of which, according to the testimony, were invasive and uncomfortable. Mobile devices were strictly forbidden. Phones were collected at the entrance to ensure that no photos, videos, or recordings ever left the premises. He wanted total control, the assistant emphasized. Behind the scenes, teams of staff worked tirelessly to execute every element of the night, ensuring that nothing occurred outside of Diddy's purview. This wasn't just about hosting a party, they said. It was about creating a controlled environment where nothing happened without his permission. The shock deepened as the assistant recounted specific incidents. In one disturbing account, they described a guest who resisted one of Diddy's alleged demands. According to the assistant, the individual was immediately removed, humiliated in front of the others, and escorted out. There was no room for defiance, the assistant said, a statement that rippled through the courtroom. Murmurs broke out in the gallery, and several jury members shifted in their seats, visibly unsettled by the description. The allegations extended beyond the parties themselves, delving into how Diddy allegedly preserved this environment of secrecy and control. The assistant testified that loyalty was cultivated among his inner circle, with those who might speak out being silenced or exiled. If you didn't play by the rules, they explained, you were out. No questions asked. Their words painted a chilling picture of manipulation and coercion, describing how the atmosphere of the parties intentionally blurred the line between voluntary participation and psychological pressure. This level of control, they insisted, was no accident. It was strategic. In another account, the assistant described how alcohol and mood-enhancing substances were routinely and freely available, creating a disorienting, high-pressure environment that pushed attendees toward compliance. Anyone who expressed discomfort, they claimed, was either encouraged to leave quietly or subtly made to feel like they didn't belong. It was about fitting in or being pushed out, they said. As the courtroom absorbed each revelation, Diddy sat motionless at the defense table. His expression remained dark and unreadable, but the tension around him was unmistakable. Observers outside the courtroom quickly seized on the magnitude of the allegations, with some comparing the case to other high-profile celebrity scandals. Legal experts noted that the specificity and consistency of the assistant's testimony could prove pivotal, not only for the trial's outcome but for the public's broader perception of Diddy's private conduct. By the end of the day's session, the weight of the testimony lingered heavily in the room. The stories described had clearly shaken the audience, prompting serious questions about the culture and power dynamics allegedly operating behind the scenes. Yet even after all the bombshells dropped, one ominous truth remained. The most shocking incident of all had not yet been addressed. But for now, the assistant's words had left an impression that wouldn't be easily erased.
He's doing, is he running an entertainment and fashion industry, or is he running essentially a criminal organization?
By the way, we have a poll up right now. You can participate in it. Do you think Cassie Ventura was a victim or partner in this? Ready for this? 82%, well, this doesn't make sense. 82% say yes, I don't know if that's yes to. I think we need clarification. 82% say victim or partner. We'll get a clarification on that.
By the way,
right now.
but that's my answer to that question.
Oh,
Was
okay.
he a victim or a
82%
partner?
say victim. 82% say victim. Maybe based on we're reporting on the testimony right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think she is a victim if the allegations are true, but also she is involved in some of the criminal act. I mean, she's getting those prostitutes, right? She's making payments to them, allegedly. She's having them come. So she's involved in some of the alleged criminal activity. And that's an interesting point that wouldn't just apply to her. Other people in his orbit might be some combination of victim and co-conspirator.
But you know what? That video changes everything, because the argument would be, what do you think happens if she says no?
Yeah.
What do you think happens if she says, I'm not in the mood for a freak off tonight. I'm not going to pay the dancer.
I'll be sure he came out saying that Kim Porter death needs to be looked into.
I think that Al being his ex-wife, he have every right, knowing about the stuff that came out about Diddy and what he was doing. You understand what he has done in the past, and people have overlooked it. By him coming out and saying that he hoped that he could get her case reopened. There was a guy called John the Paperwork Party. They would put in an open petition to get Kim's case reopened. You understand what I'm saying? So I'll be sure doing this is showing that, you know, he still got love for Quincy's mother. He still want to find out the truth, because allegedly Kim was found the day before and the day of her death, and then now she found in the bed dead from pneumonia. That just don't sound right, bro. That don't sound right at all.
So you feel the same way about her death being suspect?
I don't think nobody in America think it's nothing suspicious about Kim's death, bro. If you are rich like that, you could, you know, Kim had, I think a net worth of like, what, 12 million a year or something like that? Kim could have called any doctor to come over and look at her. If she was that bad, you know, she could have called an ambulance or something like that. Everything is suspicious about her death, bro. And I don't think an autopsy was done on her. And if it was a half job.
You personally, right? What do you think happened to Kim Porter?
If I say something personal, bro, and my belief, and I put it on to the public, then I might be like...
Diddy's career has long been defined by power, influence, and a cultural legacy that spans decades. From his dominance in the music industry to his ventures in fashion, business, and media, he represented more than just a celebrity. He embodied a lifestyle. For years, his brand thrived on an image of success, luxury, and creativity, making him synonymous with both talent and ambition. However, the courtroom revelations surrounding the allegations have begun to chip away at that polished persona, leaving many to wonder what this trial means for his once unshakable legacy. As disturbing details about the infamous freak-off nights and the alleged control exercised over attendees emerged in court, public reaction shifted dramatically. Media headlines exploded with phrases like Diddy's dark side and allegations that could end a legacy, signaling just how deeply the testimony impacted his image. Social media quickly became a frenzy of discussion and outrage, with hashtags related to the trial trending for days. Public opinions ranged from disbelief to anger, as both fans and critics grappled with the version of Diddy presented in court. To many, this felt less like a simple legal battle and more like the potential unraveling of a man whose influence once seemed untouchable. Gene Deal's corroborating testimony added yet another layer of impact. As a longtime insider, his words carried devastating weight. The public, already grappling with the assistant's explosive statements, now had a second voice reinforcing much of the same narrative. As one legal analyst noted, when multiple people step forward to provide consistent details, the court and public opinion cannot ignore it. This sentiment extended far beyond the courtroom, raising questions not only about Diddy's legal situation but also about his relationships within the industry. The larger implications of these allegations are difficult to ignore. History has shown that even the most influential public figures are not immune to the fallout from scandals, especially those that strike at the core of their carefully managed personas. High-profile cases like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein illustrate the swift dismantling of legacies once allegations cross a certain threshold. While Diddy's situation remains unique, the trial has already begun to echo patterns seen in those earlier cases. Conversations about power, entitlement, and the responsibilities of those at the top have reignited in the media, with some speculating whether these allegations could permanently alter how Diddy's contributions to music and culture are remembered. Legal experts observing the trial have also weighed in. Some argue that, regardless of the outcome, the accusations alone have already dealt a significant blow to Diddy's public image. Even without a verdict, the court of public opinion is incredibly powerful, one expert remarked. Others noted that for individuals like Diddy, whose reputation is deeply intertwined with their business ventures, the implications of this scrutiny could extend far beyond the verdict, impacting partnerships, future projects, and influence within the entertainment world. With so many unanswered questions and the trial still ongoing, the stakes for Diddy's legacy couldn't be higher. Whether his empire can weather this storm remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the impact of these revelations will ripple far beyond the courtroom walls. What remains now is to wonder just how much more damage the remaining testimony could cause. The assistant's testimony has undeniably shifted the narrative surrounding Diddy, revealing unsettling details that could reshape his career and legacy. Each account peeled back another layer, exposing allegations of control, secrecy, and manipulation at the heart of these infamous freak-off nights. What's striking is how these revelations cast a harsher light on the entertainment industry itself, highlighting the unchecked power wielded behind closed doors. It's a moment to question whether these structures are built to protect those with influence at any cost. As this case unfolds, the shockwaves promise to extend far beyond one man. Stay tuned for updates.